months can ask as much as questions that they would like to have. And thanks again to Thomas, and I would leave it to you, Riman. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Professor. So my name is Riman Hassanuddin. I'm a senior year student in the International Relations Department in the University of Sharjah. Currently, I'm the president of IR Society and a member in the executive committee. So I don't want to take up much of your time today, but I would like to thank everyone who worked hard to put this event together. This event was made possible due to the initiatives of Ms. Yasmin Hibrawi and Ms. Hala Abdurrahman from the American Consulate in Dubai. So together with the students of IR Society and the members of our department who worked tirelessly to ensure that this event will be a success. Namely, from our department, we have the department secretary, Hala Maher, and our dear Dr. Shayma Kataria, our department chairman, Dr. Sherko Kermanj, and as well as the Dean of the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences. His name is Dr. Hussein Al-Uthman. Needless to say, this event further cements the great association that University of Sharjah enjoys with the American Consulate in Dubai. We have previously hosted the American Consul General, Philip Frayne, from a seminar in the on American Middle Eastern ties, as well as performing field trips to the American Consulate itself. It is critical for us in the 21st century to understand the inner workings of American politics, as the effects of globalization have ensured that the events in the United States have true international repercussions, including for our very own region here in the Middle East. As a Department of Politics and International Relations, students are offered a crucial course called American National Government, taught by our very own Dr. Kataria. This course is designed to introduce students to the foundation, to the structure and functioning of the American government. It examines the three branches of government, as well as the American foreign and defense policy. Moving on from this, I would like to extend a warm welcome to the Head of Public Affairs at the U.S. Consulate in the UAE, Yasmin Hibrawi, and once again, thank her for her hard work to make this seminar possible. So over to you, Yasmin.
Thank you, Riman. As Riman said, my name is Yasmin Hibrawi, and I'm the head of the Public Affairs section here at the U.S. Consulate in Dubai. We're very happy to be collaborating today with the University of Sharjah. And one of our goals at the U.S. Consulate is to strengthen the ties between the U.S. and the UAE. And one of the ways that we do this is by bringing U.S. experts to speak to foreign audiences, which is why I'm pleased today to introduce our U.S. expert, Thomas Schaller. Mr. Schaller is a professor of political science at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. He is the author of several books, some of which are The Stronghold, How Republicans Captured Congress but Surrendered the White House, and Whistling Past Dixie, How Democrats Can Win Without the South. He's a former political columnist for the Baltimore Sun and has published commentaries in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the LA Times. He has appeared on ABC News, MSNBC, National Public Radio, and C-SPAN. Since 2004, Tom has given lectures on American elections in 19 countries on behalf of the State Department. The title of today's session is The Electoral Process, and it's about the importance of the US electoral process and its structure, of which freedom of expression is a fundamental part of. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tom.
Well, thank you, Yasmin, and also to your staff, Hala and Tara, and I'm sure a whole battalion of people that I didn't even meet that put these events together. And also thank you to Dr. Kermanj and Riman and all of the representatives of Sharjah, University of Sharjah, for inviting me. I'm very excited to be here. As Yasmin pointed out, it's now 21 countries. I need to update my biography a little bit. I did go to Estonia and Latvia earlier this year, just in February before the COVID pandemic breakout. So I've now been since 2004 presidential cycle in 21 different countries, including 4 years ago in the UAE. So I was there for about 5 or 6 days, I think in the spring of 2016, March or April, 4 years ago, and enjoyed my visit there. And even though it's only virtual this time, I'm excited to be back. So it's nice to see everyone. And thank you for coming out, I guess, this afternoon in your world this morning in mind. I'm gonna, I guess I have to share here. Hold on a second. I'll put the PowerPoint up. Hopefully this will work fine. Everyone can see it, I hope. Yes, Yasmin, everybody's got it?
It works.
Yep.
Okay, great. I just wanted a quick confirmation. Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right, so like I said, I'm excited to be here and to be back, at least virtually. What I'm going to do is run you through about 20 slides and then maybe a half an hour, 40 minutes at tops, and then take your questions. I'm going to try to give you a sense of briefly how our presidential election system works, because it is a very unusual, in fact, very unique system for electing both our head of state and head of government. Most other countries have a prime minister and a president separately, but our president is both the head of state and head of government. And we've been electing our presidents this way more or less since the founding, although there have been some important changes to the system. So for those who may not be familiar with it or who were confused by the outcome in the 2016 election, or for those old enough to remember the 2000 election, both of which are elections where the popular vote winners, Al Gore and Hillary Clinton, did not win the election to George Bush and Donald Trump, respectively. Let me explain how our system works very briefly. I'm happy to take questions along the way, or we can wait till the end, however the moderators want to handle it. Our Electoral College is essentially a colonial vestige of the founding period, when the founding fathers were drafting our Constitution in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787. They didn't even pick up the subject of electing presidents until 3 weeks before they finally finished the document on September 17th. And they kind of rushed it a little bit, and they made some mistakes, as they had to admit, by 1800 with the 12th Amendment. So our Electoral College process is a bit bizarre to many people, including many Americans today. It's an indirect election, technically, where voters pick electors and electors pick the president. So it's technically a three-stage process where the votes by citizens are cast in November. The electors meet in December to certify the results, and those results are sent to the Congress in early January and officially open there. Now, for the most part, in years past, we know on election night who won, because we know how many electors have been captured, and we expect those electors to vote accordingly in December. And it's all essentially a formality for the latter two stages. But perhaps this year we will have some controversies and the election will be extended, as it was in 2000, for 36 more days. We'll see. The key provision in our Electoral College is that it's not a national election, in the sense that the popular vote is not aggregated nationally. I didn't say the vote, it's not a national popular election in the sense of participation. Everybody in the country, in the 50 states plus the District of Columbia, Washington, where I live, can participate, but our votes are not aggregated on a nationwide basis. They are aggregated 51 separate times for the 50 states plus the District of Columbia. And the popular vote winner, even if that he or she doesn't get a pure majority, 50%, just the plurality winner, whoever gets the most votes in the state, wins that state's electors. And as I'll describe on the next slide, it's a winner-take-all process for those electors. Now, each state's electoral count is roughly, but not perfectly, based on the state's share of the national population. It's equal to the congressional delegation of the state. So here in Maryland, we have 8 House members, and like every state, we have 2 senators, regardless of population. So you can see our electoral count total of 10, Maryland, out of the 538 electors, is roughly equal to our portion of the population. But it would be much more proportional if it was just based on the House, because our Senate, as many of you know, each state gets 2 senators, whether it's California, which has nearly 40 million people in Yasmin's home state, or whether it's Wyoming, that only has 600,000 people. So the ratio of people between California and Wyoming is 69-1, but the number of electors that California casts, 55, to the number of electoral votes that Wyoming casts, which is just 3, is only 18-1. So there are, like I said, 69 Californians for every person from Wyoming, but there are only 18 electoral votes cast by California relative to every electoral vote cast in Wyoming, because every state has is guaranteed in the Constitution 1 House member and 2 senators. So every state has at least 3 electoral votes, including DC, which has 3 electoral votes here in Washington, DC. So basically, when you add up the total number of House seats in our House chamber, 435, and the number of senators, 50 states times 2 is 100, that makes 535, and then DC gets the other 3. That's how you get to the 538 total electors. And those electors are not inanimate objects like points on a scoreboard. They're actual people. So you don't see their names on the ballot, but when you go in to cast your vote, you're technically casting your vote for a slate of electors in your state, and those people then go in December to the respective state legislatures. Annapolis here in nearby Maryland, the state where I teach, or Albany, my home state, state's capital in New York. All of those electors meet on the same day, the second Wednesday of December, and technically vote for the president and certify the president's election in December. Now, the most important voting rule, as I mentioned, with respect to the Electoral College, is that it's a winner-take-all phenomena in all but 2 states, Nebraska and Maine, which only have 9 total electoral votes. Whoever wins the popular vote, even by 1 popular vote, wins all of that state's electors. Total wins 100% of the electors, essentially. So you could win Maryland by 1 popular vote and you get all 10 electors. You could win California by 1 popular vote and get all of California's 55 electors. They're the most populous state, so they have the most House seats, so they have the most electors. In any case, because of that, candidates from both parties will have wasted votes in a sense, right? You'll have a surplus of votes if you're Hillary Clinton in New York, her home state, and California, which she won those 2 states by about 2.5 million extra votes, but she can't take those votes and siphon them or move them into some of the states that she lost narrowly, like Michigan or Wisconsin or Pennsylvania 4 years ago. To be fair, the losing candidate in every state wastes all those votes too, right? Trump has millions of votes, not as many in California and New York, and he can't take them and move them to other states either. But because it's not a national popular vote and because it's winner take all for those electors, there's inefficiencies in the system. Now, at present, this hasn't always been the case. There really are only a handful of states that are in play. We call them swing states or competitive states. Sometimes you'll hear them referred to as purple states because the Democrats are generally referred to as the blue party and the Republicans as the red party. And halfway between blue and red, of course, is purple in the color scheme. And at present, because of our polarization in the country, most of the states are either solidly red, Republican, that's the easiest way to remember, red R, Republican R, or solidly blue, Democratic, like California and New York are very blue states, like Wyoming and Alaska are very solidly R, Republican red states. We only have a very small set of states that are competitive between the 2 parties. And so they could go either way, and they're called swing states because they could swing toward Trump or Biden, just as they could have swung and did swing between Obama and Trump 4 years ago. And the universe of those states is very small right now because of our country's polarization. Now, this doesn't mean that in those states there are no solid Democrats and no loyal Republicans. It just means the balance between those 2 coalitions is relatively even, where you have about 45% Republican leaning voters, and you have about 45% Republican or Republican leaning Democratic or Democratic leaning voters. And so the states are evenly balanced. It's not like 100% of the voters are undecided there. So we're really talking about an election that narrows down to 8 or 10 states, and not even all the voters in those 8 or 10 states, really only 8 to 10% of the voters in those states. So in an election 4 years ago, where 139 million votes were cast, it really came down to about 7 or 8 million voters in about 7 to 10 states, if even that. And I'm going to explain to you about these swing states in just a minute. So there are 538 electoral votes. You need an absolute majority, not a plurality. You can't just get the most. You have to get half or plus 1. And half of 538 is 269, plus 1 is 270. So if you can get to 270 electoral votes, you win. Donald Trump had 306, so he had 36 votes in excess. Those of you old enough to remember will remember the 2000 election where George W. Bush finished with 271, very, very close. One of the closest elections in American history. And even though he lost the popular vote, he got the Electoral College majority with 1 vote to spare, essentially. It is possible, as I say in the last bullet point here, therefore, and it has happened now twice in the last 5 elections, as I already mentioned, the Bush-Gore race in 2000, and of course the Trump-Clinton race, most recent presidential election 4 years ago, for the person who gets the most popular votes to not get a majority of the electoral votes. And so the person who finishes second wins. We call these either misfired elections or wrong winner elections. Political scientists use different terms, but basically it's the popular vote winner does not get his or her 4 years ago popular votes in the right combination to win enough states whose electors add up to 270 or more. And so that creates what's called a misfired or a wrong winner election. We hadn't had one since 1888 until 2000, and now we've had 2 in 5 cycles, with the Republicans benefiting from what is essentially an electoral college advantage. Now, when you look at the map, if you notice down here in the bottom left corner, you can see this is a cartoon by Pulitzer Prize winning cartoonist Tom Tolles of the Washington Post. And if you could see there, the month is 10 October and the year is 2004. And the graphic here is the country where every vote counts. And it says the undecided, not the United States, the undecided states of America, those evenly balanced swing or purple states, that's the country where every vote counts, because the other 40 or 42 states don't really matter, because there's no reason for Donald Trump to campaign in Wyoming. He knows he's going to win it. And there's no reason for Hillary Clinton to have campaigned there because she knows she's going to lose it. And getting a few extra votes there doesn't matter because it's winner take all. It's not a proportional assignment or a proportional win of those electoral votes. It's winner take all. And so the vast majority of attention is spent by the candidates and their campaigns and their ad campaigns and their media buys in just a handful of states. Now, you might say, Dr. Schaller, you need to update this slide. It's from 2004. We're 16 years later now. But what's interesting about the states that you see here are 2 things. One, there's only 10 states in here. That means 40 of the states, we already know who's going to win. And more to the point, it's the same states that are the same swing states today. Iowa, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Florida, those are considered, again, 6 of the most competitive states. Minnesota's also a state that Trump has been campaigning in this week. Now, some of these southwestern states like Nevada, New Mexico have become a little bit more blue and a little bit more safe. So Biden is essentially going to win Colorado and Trump is not trying there, New Mexico. But some other states have moved into play, like North Carolina. The point here is that it's the same number of states and literally the same states that have been the swing states for 16 years now. And of course, as I said, when you look at where the candidates spend their money, this is from the 2012 election, but I'll show you one from the current election. You can see where Romney spent his money and Obama spent his money. It's in those same states, Ohio, Pennsylvania. These are scaled based on the media buys. These other states are so small, they're little slivers here. The money is spent where? Nevada, Colorado, Iowa, right? This is 8 years after the map I just showed you, and it's still the same states. Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania. You see Virginia, North Carolina have become more swing states as the Democrats have become more competitive there. But basically, we've had the same set of swing states now for 2 decades, with some moving in and some moving out, but basically the same 8 or 10 states have been the battleground for the presidential race since essentially Bush v. Gore, since the end of the Clinton administration era. Look at the media buys for Bush or for Biden and Trump right now, where they've spent their money. Yeah, the blue dot circles are a little bit bigger because Biden has more money. He raised $362 million, a record in August for a single month. And then he broke his own record last month in September with $383 million. And Trump's campaign is struggling a little bit with cash on hand. So the blue circles are bigger. That's one thing you can take away. But the larger point I want you to see here is that between May and October, which is the last 6 months more or less of the election, it's in the same places, right? They're buying television ads in the same media markets, in and around Phoenix and Tucson, in and around Las Vegas, in and around Minneapolis, St. Paul, in and around Milwaukee, Detroit, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, Atlanta, Orlando, Miami, and so forth, right? It's not a coincidence they're not spending any money in these states because these are solidly red Republican states or solidly blue Democratic states like Oregon. So the campaigns know where the voters are and they know where the swing states are, and they're spending money in the same place. Look at where they spend their time too. Look at where the candidates spend their time. In the 2016 election, 94% of the campaign visits by either Trump or Clinton or their running mates or their spouses, right? Because you have basically 8, they call them principals, right? You have Trump and his wife, the first lady, you have Pence and his wife, and right now you have Joe Biden and his wife, and you have Kamala Harris and her husband. Those 8 principals are sort of the ticket plus their spouses. They don't spend their time up in Montana and the Dakotas and Wyoming or Alaska or Hawaii, which are far, far away. They spend their time in Nevada and Arizona and Ohio and Pennsylvania. And I'll move this over here a little bit. And North Carolina and Florida 6 years ago. And in fact, as it says here, 2/3 of the campaign events in the general election, and that's a little better, in 2016 were held in just 6 states, and 94%, basically all of the events, took place in just 12 states. So the candidates spend their time and they spend their money, and whether that money is spent on television ads or radio ads or digital Facebook ads that are targeted by state or city or neighborhood, by street or to individuals, those ad buys, the money and the resources and the time are spent in the swing states. Okay, looking back at that electoral college result, we see here again that Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by about 2.5 million popular votes over Donald Trump. That translated to about 48% of the national popular vote. Trump 46%, I'm rounding here. The other 6% went to third-party candidates, Gary Johnson, the Libertarian candidate, Jill Stein, the Green candidate. Hillary Clinton carried 20 states, including DC. Donald Trump carried 31 states, and that gave Trump 306 electoral votes. Again, it's winner take all in almost all of the states. And that was enough for him to get an electoral college majority. 306 is bigger than 270, even though he came second in the popular vote. And the states that really decided it for him were these sort of 3 Rust Belt states, or upper Midwest. Pennsylvania is sort of more Northeast, but this is sort of the Midwest, and this is sort of New England and the Northeast, and here's the Southeast. But these are sort of Rust Belt states along what's called the I-90 corridor, which is a highway that runs from Boston all the way to Seattle. And this area is sort of the old industrial backbone of the country. We have between sort of Boston and I-90 all the way up to Minneapolis. We build cars and dig coal and manufacturing and textiles, clothing, and so forth. And these were the biggest and fastest growing regions of the country in the late 19th century and the early 20th century. They're losing population now to the Sun Belt, to the southern states. But these are critical states because they're sort of microcosms of the country. And as the Midwest goes, usually goes the presidential election race. In fact, when you look at these 8 states, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Iowa, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, these 8 Midwest states, every presidential candidate, except for one in the last 100 years, has won at least 4 of those 8 states. And sure enough, Trump won 6 of those 8 states, except for Minnesota and Illinois. So as this part of the country goes, usually the whole country goes. This is not the most Catholic region of the country. New England is, but it's the second most Catholic region. It's not the most evangelical Protestant region. That's the Southeast, but it's the second most. It has a relatively similar mix of white and non-white populations, majority white, but significant pockets of Black and Latino voters in places like Minneapolis, St. Paul, or Milwaukee, Wisconsin, or Gary, Indiana, and Chicago, or Detroit, Michigan, which is here, or Cleveland, Ohio, or if you go into Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, and Philadelphia. So it's sort of a microcosm. As the Midwest goes, so goes the country, because it looks like a smaller, miniaturized version of the country as a whole. And you can see that Trump won these 3 states, and these 3 states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, have a total of 46 electoral votes. And if you subtract those 46, he wouldn't have won. He would have been under 270. He would have been at 260. And look how close he won them. He won them by a combined 80,000 plus votes, fewer than 90,000 votes, and won them, each of them, by less than 1% statewide. He won Wisconsin by about 0.7%, and Pennsylvania by 0.8%, and Michigan the most narrowly by 0.2%. And you can see when it's broken down by county, Trump wins a majority of the counties, but Clinton dominates in the bigger, densely populated counties like Madison, where the state capital is, where the state university is, Dane County, Milwaukee County, the largest city in Wisconsin, ditto Detroit. Clinton gets huge victories there by wide margins in large states. Ann Arbor, where the State University of Michigan is, Flint, a major county, an industrial county, car-making county. Donald Trump winning a lot of the smaller and mid-sized counties. Likewise in Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh is Allegheny County, the second largest city. Hillary Clinton with big margins in Philadelphia and the Philadelphia suburbs, which are densely populated in and around Philadelphia. So Trump's margins there, if he loses those 3 states, if she can somehow get 50,000 votes more here and 11,000 here and 28,000 here, she wins the presidency and of course still wins the popular vote as well. Now this speaks directly to this issue of whether or not one party or candidate in the short term here has an electoral college advantage. And when you run sort of trials of the results in the electoral college based on projection of the 2-party share, you can see that the Republicans and of course they have won 2 elections despite losing the popular vote, they have an electoral college advantage. This is the 2-party share of the national Democratic votes. This says if we run a simulation and Biden gets half of the vote and Trump gets half of the vote, that's where we'd be at 50%. What is the probability that Biden and the Democrats win the election in the blue? And you can see it's only about 13, 14, 15%. So if the final national popular vote, again, taking all the third-party votes, this is a 2-party measure where you just discount the third-party votes, you add up all of Biden's votes, you add up all of Trump's votes and say, what share do they have? And it's going to be somewhere around 50, 51, 52, 53. You can see in a 50-50 race, Trump is likely to win about 85, 86% of the time based on simulations. Even if Biden gets to 51%, Trump is favored slightly, about 55, 45%. Biden really has to get up to around 52 to 48 victory to have a 3/4 chance of winning. And certainly if he gets up to 53%, he's almost certain to win. So that shows you there's a built-in electoral college advantage. And the reason for that, very shortly, this is a complex, is that those 2 extra Senate electors that each state gets, no matter how small. Remember, Wyoming gets 2 senators and therefore 2 electors because of its 2 senators, just like California, even though California is 69 times the size of Wyoming or 66 times the size of Wyoming. Those extra 2 electors for the small states gives them extra weight. And so the party that does better with the small states, particularly small white rural states, which is the Republican Party, has an electoral college advantage at present. This isn't always the case that the Republicans have been advantaged, but at present they are. So what kind of factors determine who wins a presidential race? This is sort of what I'll spend the rest of my time on. And the answer is several things. Some of it are sort of can be grouped into 2 categories. There's party and incumbency factors, things about who's in the White House and how long he or she has been and his party has been in the White House. And then there are sort of economic and sort of right track, wrong, the state of the nation, if you will. So there's sort of what is the partisan state of affairs, and then what is the national state of affairs economically and otherwise? Is the country moving in the right or wrong track according to voters? So let's do these in sort of 2 chunks, and then I'll show you some slides. All else equal, when an incumbent is running for a second term, those incumbents win. So historically, the incumbent party wins about 2/3 of presidential elections. And in the post-war period, the incumbent party has won 8 out of 11 presidential elections, 72%. So the recent period is very similar to the overall historical period of about 2/3. It's a little bit better since the Second World War. So incumbents running for a second term are favored to win. So that favors Trump very clearly, right? On the other hand, sometimes when incumbents are running for re-election, their party has been in office for a while, like Harry Truman running for a 6th Democratic term in a row after 4 terms of Roosevelt and 1 term for Truman. It becomes harder because people start to want to give the other party a chance. They get fatigued. So the longer a party has been in office, the harder it is to win. And in the post-war period, this is very clear. Only once has either party won 3 presidential terms in a row, and that was Ronald Reagan twice in 1980 and 84, followed by George Bush, his vice president, in 1988. Now, yes, the Democrats have won the popular vote 3 times in a row, twice now. They won it with Clinton in 92, Clinton in 96, and Gore in 2000. And then they just did it in the last 3 elections with Obama winning election, re-election, and Hillary Clinton winning the popular vote. So it's possible to win the popular vote 3 times in a row, but it's very hard to win the Electoral College 3 times in a row. It's only happened once in the Second World War period. Also, the incumbent president, whether he's running for re-election like Trump or whether he's not, like Obama in 2016, the current party president's approval rating is a pretty strong predictor of how that party will do. And if that president's party is even or net positive in approval, that party tends to win. And if that party president, incumbent president, is net negative in approval, that tends to favor the out party, the party that's not in the White House at that time. So keep that in mind as we move to the second set of slides. Actually, just let's move them right there. So incumbents win about 2/3 of the time, as I said. And since World War II, 8 of the 11 incumbents have won re-election to a second term, and I'm not going to read them all off. Notice here at the bottom that the 8 presidents who all won, the 8 winners, not the 3 losers, which are Gerald Ford and George W. Bush and Jimmy Carter, that all of the presidents who won re-election since the Second World War were presidents who didn't have any party internal challenges. They ran unopposed, essentially, for renomination within their party to be nominated for a second term. So Gerald Ford had a challenge from Ronald Reagan in 1976, and he lost re-election. He wasn't initially elected, of course, because he took over after Nixon was forced to resign. Jimmy Carter had a serious challenge from Teddy Kennedy, the family heir to the, Bobby Kennedy and Jack Kennedy, and Carter lost re-election to Reagan in 1980. And George H.W. Bush had a party challenge from evangelical leaders like Pat Robertson and Pat Buchanan from the sort of isolationist Trump wing of the party back then in 92, and he lost re-election. But all presidents who've been renominated without contest and running for just a second term for their party in a row have won. So that also favors Trump as well, right? On the other hand, the approval ratings really don't favor Trump. When you look at the winners since the Second World War and their approval ratings, and this is just a figure where they ask people, do you approve or disapprove? And they subtract the disapproval from approval. So if this number is positive, it means the president has more people approving than disapproving. And if this number is negative, it means it has more people disapproving than approving. So Eisenhower, very popular former general who led the Allied forces in World War II, when he came up for re-election after getting elected in 1952, he came up for re-election in 1956. About 80% of the country approved of him, only 20% disapproved, and 80 minus 20 is 60. So, I mean, this is just a record score here in the modern era. Reagan and Nixon, who both won 49 out of 50 states, they were about 60-40 approval, disapproval, right? 60 minus 40 is about 20. I'm rounding off a little bit here, right? 60 minus 40 is about 20. So Reagan goes into his reelection with 60% of the country approving his performance and 40% disapproving. Same with Nixon. By the time you get to Clinton, it's more like 57-43, right? That's the 14-point difference, but a comfortable margin of victory. You can see Bush and Obama, who won pretty close. They won re-election in 2004 and 2012, but basically half the country supported them, approved them, and half didn't. And this speaks to our very polarized country, where about half the country is Republican, half the country is Democratic, and it doesn't really matter their policies or their decisions or the economy. These are two presidents who weren't net negative, maybe Obama was slightly negative, right? But they were basically even. They were 50-50 approval, disapproval presidents. Who are the losers? Carter, minus 10 going into re-election. Bush in 1992, minus 11 going into re-election. And where is Trump? About minus 9. He's about minus 10 today, minus 11. So Trump looks like he's in this category here of the losing presidents, not the winning presidents. And you take this number is taken 200 days before the election. You can see where Trump was on April 25th of this year is similar to where George W. Bush and Jimmy Carter is. Ford, I didn't put in the previous slide. You can see Ford was sort of in there with Obama and Bush, could go either way. He was about +1 going into re-election in 1976. I don't know why I left Ford out of this slide here. So Trump is in a sort of loser category here based on his approval in 200 days before the election, but that's 200 days before the election. Where is he today? And he's exactly where he was 200 days ago. In fact, he's exactly where he was 30 months ago. You can see Trump's net approval, disapproval, right? When you subtract this number from this number, what do you get? 11. He's been at -9, -8, -10, -11, -7 for 30 months. People have made up their mind about Donald Trump for 30 months. And it goes up and down based on, some episode or whatever. It went down a little bit initially on COVID as people rallied behind the president, but then as his performance and management of COVID sort of soured, people soured on him and his disapproval went up and his approval went down. And then it settled right back down to where it is, -9, -10, -11. I took this screenshot from Nate Silver's 538 site this morning. So this is the most current average of polls in terms of Trump's approval, okay? All right. Then the second half of this slide is about what is the state of the nation? Where is the GDP? Is the country adding jobs? Is it growing economically, or is it going down? And obviously, if the GDP, if the growth of the country is positive, that favors the party running for re-election, whether it's an actual president running for a second term or whether it's Hillary Clinton running for a third Democratic term. If the economy is moving in a positive direction, that's good for the incumbent party, bad for the out party. If there's lower unemployment rates or going down, that's good for the in party, bad for the out party. And then right track, wrong track indicators. If a solid majority of people or country sort of split on the right track, wrong track, that's good for the incumbent party. But if it's net negative, if far more people think the country's on the wrong track than the right track, that's bad for the incumbent party. That makes sense, right? So let's take a look at these numbers right now. You can see that when the right track, wrong track number is net negative, especially when it gets over like 18, 20 points, that's when the control of the White House flips parties. So in 1980, the country, about 20% of the country under Carter thought the country was going in the right direction, 80% wrong direction. That's a net of -59, -60%. Ronald Reagan wins that election, right? But by the time Ronald Reagan is running for re-election, the country's relatively evenly divided. So this number can be negative, But if it's in single digits or in the teens, those are elections where the White House party, who's ever in the White House at that time, holds the White House. But when this number gets up over 18, and certainly when it gets into the 30s or 40s or 50s, that's a scenario where the White House is going to change hands as a result of the election. And notice even when it was minus 18 here, right? A bad number sort of for Gore, he still won the popular vote. Notice that even when it was minus 31 for the Democrats, because the Democrats are in office now in 2016 going into that election, Hillary Clinton still won the popular vote despite a wrong track number of minus 31. So maybe Trump can win at minus 46, but this is the right track, wrong track number right now. And remember, she lost the electoral college, even though she won the popular vote, and Trump has a slight advantage. So maybe Trump can win with a minus 46, but that would be the highest number in history in the modern period to hold the White House for the Republicans, right? Because Trump needs a hold here, not a flip. And this number does not tend to favor him holding the White House. And in fact, when you look at this number and you break it down a little bit in terms of right track, wrong track, the number has come down significantly among Republicans. It's come down by half since COVID, basically, right? You can see most Democrats, there's a partisan effect. Notice that Republicans think the country's more on a right track because they have a president in their White House. So this is a partisan measure that skews toward, do you favor the party in the White House? You're more likely to say right track. If you're not the party and your party's not in the White House, you're more likely to say wrong track. So at the start of the year, before anybody had heard of COVID-19, only 16% of Democrats thought we were on the right track, but that's cut in half. That's not a big move when you're only starting at 16, it's down to 8. But when you're starting at 68 and you're down under 30, half of Republicans now agree the country's moving on the wrong track. And what's driving that? Well, of course, COVID is driving that. Take a look at how bad the situation is on COVID. Independents are probably a good proxy for the country as a whole. And about 66 of them, 2/3 of them think that America is doing somewhat worse or much worse, right, on managing the COVID problem. Of course, Democrats are more critical. It's partisan, right? And so you have 90% of Democrats saying the United States has handled the COVID crisis somewhat or much worse than other countries. But even Republicans, about 44% of Republicans, not Trump's base over here, but 44% of Republicans admit the country is handling COVID worse than other countries. Now, maybe they're blaming Democratic governors, right? It's hard to say that they're also blaming Trump. They're just admitting that the country's moving in the wrong track. So how blame is assigned and so forth, that you can't necessarily tell from this. But when you look at this chart right here and you look at this chart right here, it's very clear that COVID has tanked the right track, wrong track numbers nationally and even among Republicans and slightly among Democrats, even though most Democrats thought the country was on the wrong track even before COVID. So when you put this all together and you try to figure out, okay, who's going to win this election? The Electoral College rules at present favor Donald Trump because the small state advantage gives him extra electoral votes in those small states, just like it did 4 years ago, and certainly how it did for George Bush in 2000. He's an incumbent seeking re-election for only a second term. So that favors him both in the fact that he's running for re-election himself and the party has only been in office for 4 years. So those factors at the sort of top half of the earlier PowerPoint slide all point to a Trump victory. Historically, if you didn't know anything about the polls, you didn't know anything about COVID. In fact, as I was saying to people on the day after the 2016 election, I said, if you have no other information right now, before Trump's even inaugurated on November 10th, 2016, all else equal, Trump was favored to win on the day after he won his initial election, right? Because he's an incumbent president at that point. If you assume nobody's going to challenge him in the primary and he's only running for his party's second term, he's favored all else equal, even though you don't even know what's going to happen over the next 4 years. You don't know the state of the economy. You certainly don't know there's a pandemic coming. You don't know who the Democrats are going to nominate and who that person is going to pick as his running mate. You don't have any of that information 4 years ago, November, and you can predict a Trump victory based on that alone. On the other hand, when you look at GDP and unemployment, I sort of skipped these statistics. The GDP and unemployment rates are really hurting Trump right now. They've gone up and down and so forth. I skipped a couple of those slides because of time, but trust me, the GDP collapse, and with COVID, we had a 33% annualized rate GDP collapse in the second quarter. And the unemployment rate, of course, 44 million people filing for unemployment in the first 3 months of the pandemic. Some of those jobs have come back, but not everybody has been reemployed. And Trump is net negative about 4 million jobs after 4 years. He'll be the first president in 80 years, or since Hoover really, to have net negative job growth during his 4 years. I already did the right track, wrong track. You can see where that is. He's net negative on that. So that favors Trump is, so Biden is favored there. And then on presidential approval, Obviously, the incumbent party is -9, -10, -11, and that favors Biden. I think there's a couple of unknowns here, like how people vote about COVID. Do they blame China? Do they blame Trump? Do they blame government officials? Do they blame doctors and so forth? And of course, we have this wild card in terms of whether or not Trump and the Republican Party will dispute the votes if he's losing and so forth, or signal that the election has been stolen. So there are a couple of wild cards here that I'm not really sure how they affect the election. But I think it'll be a relatively close election. I think Biden is favored to win for obvious reasons. He's leading nationally by 6, 7, or 8 points. He's leading in most of the swing states, some more narrowly than others. But with a week to go, historically, a president with a -10, -11 approval rating and a right track, wrong track for the country at this low do not win re-elections. So Trump is likely to be in the category with Jimmy Carter and Gerald Ford and George H.W. Bush as incumbent presidents who did not win a second term. That puts me right about 940. So I'll stop there and say thank you and take your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas, for the seminar. It was really informative, but I believe we should move on to the Q&A session. But before we start, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Hadil Al-Qaisi. I'm a member of the Executive Committee of the IR Society, and I'm going to be the moderator for today's Q&A session. The floor is now open for any questions you have for Dr. Thomas Schaller. If you would like to ask your question, please raise your hand and I will call your name out. Abdullah Jam'a.
Hello?
Yes. Abdullah?
Oh, hey, sorry. I had to unmute. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so my question is about the third parties. Why is it so difficult for them to win the election in the United States?
Well, the short answer to that question is the structure of our electoral system. We have what's essentially single member district with plurality rule elections, which means an election is competed between two parties for one seat or one prize. And the winner of the popular vote, even with a plurality, not a majority, wins all of that prize. So that prize could be 10 electoral votes in Maryland or 55 in California. It's winner take all for the plurality vote winner. Almost every single one of our House, 435 House seats, and almost all of our Senate seats are elected that way. There are a couple of states that do a majority runoff, like Georgia and Louisiana, but the vast majority of our US House seats, the vast majority of our US Senate seats, and in all but 2 states, Nebraska and Maine, which they aggregate their votes by congressional district instead of statewide for the electors, but in 48 of the 50 states and all but 9 of the 538 electoral votes, it's winner take all of the electors for the popular vote plurality, not majority winner. You don't need to get a majority. And there's a mathematician who about 60 years ago, French mathematician Duverger, created what's called Duverger's law. And he basically argued, and all the data supports this sort of axiom, that systems that have single member districts with plurality rule will eventually gravitate to two-party systems and third parties will die out. Now, why is that? Because you don't get anything for a second place finish. And you certainly don't get anything for a third place finish. So if we had, like many European governments had, a PR system, a proportional representation system, where some green party in Europe gets 9% of the vote in the national elections and they get 8% of the seats, they'd be able to then negotiate with one of the two major parties that didn't get 50% of the seats in the legislature. And there would be an incentive also, because voters know that their votes will be counted, to vote for third parties. Here, there's really no incentive to vote for third party candidates unless you're trying to send a protest message, because third party candidates don't win any seats or any elections. The classic example here, some of you who are old enough may remember, Ross Perot, an independent candidate, ran for president in 1992 against then incumbent George H.W. Bush, the Republican, and Bill Clinton, the Democrat. He'd got 18.9% of the vote nationwide, 19%. If you allow me to round that, that's 20. He got 1 vote out of 5. And how many states did he win the popular vote in? 0. And so how many electoral votes did he get? 0. He got 1/5 of the vote and 0% of the electors. More to the point, he encouraged and recruited 300 candidates, roughly, I think it was 290, candidates to run on the Perot Independent Party ticket for the U.S. House of Representatives. So that's more than half of the 435 House seats had a Perot candidate running locally for a U.S. House of Representative seats. How many of them won seats in that election? 0. Why? Because none of them finished first in any of those districts. And Perot didn't finish first in any state. And in fact, he finished third in every single state except for Maine, where he finished second. So he got no electoral votes. And so a strategic voter says to themselves, yeah, I'm a green, I'm not really happy with the Democrats, or I'm a libertarian, I don't like where the Republicans are on some of these social and cultural issues like abortion and guns. So I want a more libertarian party. You can vote libertarian, you can vote for Gary Johnson, 3 or 4% of the people did 4 years ago. You can vote for Jill Stein, 2% of the people did 4 years ago, but Jill Stein and Gary Johnson got the same number of electoral votes that Ross Perot did, 0. And so strategically, you know, the notion here is you're wasting your vote because the election is ultimately going to come down between the two parties. And so a lot of my students are always like, we need vibrant third parties. And I say, okay, I agree. The first thing you need to do is change the voting rules. I mean, so much of our system is run as a duopoly between the two parties. Even the debate commission is managed by the two parties and decide who gets to be on the debate stage. We haven't had a third party candidate on the debate stage since Ross Perot in the presidential debates, because the two parties write the rules and they require a minimum level of polling support for the candidates to even be able to appear in the debates. That's why you don't see any of these Joe Jorgensen or some of these other nominees from the third parties running. So we do not have a vibrant two-party, three-party, or multi-party system, and the reason is structure.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat from Shama Faisal, and she's asking, why was Trump's legitimacy questioned even after the votes were out?
Well, it depends on what you mean by legitimacy. If you mean by legitimacy, like, did he win the election? I mean, I don't think anybody was questioning the legitimacy as if like there was in 2000, where there were a lot of ballot controversies in Florida regarding late ballots, military ballots, and the hanging chads and the voting systems and the vote tabulation. And we had a 36-day recount fought in the state and national courts all the way up to the US federal Supreme Court. So there is some more question, I think, about the legitimacy of Bush's election in 2000 because of those voting disputes. I think on the count of, is Trump a legitimate president in terms of how he's managed in the American tradition and his adherence to the Constitution, that's a separate question. And their, legitimacy is more of a normative question in terms of what you think is quote unquote legitimate. So I'm not sure how to answer that question unless you mean the legitimacy of his victory or the legitimacy of the way he governs. But you can ask a follow-up if you want.
We will wait for her follow-up.
Maybe you're talking about like the Russia interference and stuff like that?
Shama? Okay, while we wait for her follow-up question, let's take another question from Shog Al-Naqbi. Please unmute yourself, Shog. Shog.
Oh, sorry. Hi.
Hi.
I wanted to ask, who's more politically powerful, Trump or Biden?
Well, right now, Trump, he's the president of the United States, and he has, the bully pulpit, as we call it. He has, pretty much any event that he does is covered by the national press in a way that's not true for the out-party presidential candidate. So obviously, the incumbent president is far more powerful than a challenger. When Biden gets into office, he'll have all the powers of the presidency that Trump has, and usually some more. Our presidential powers have been growing since the New Deal era of Franklin Roosevelt. And so each president, in theory, is more powerful than his predecessor because presidential powers have been expanding at the expense of courts and at the expense of Congress. So, Biden will be as powerful from a literal standpoint as Trump was, but maybe I'm misunderstanding your question. I'm not particularly sure how to answer that question.
All right, thank you. We have a question or a statement that is saying, essentially then, it's the electors' vote and not really ours, yet there's always societal pressure on us to vote. Is that correct? Is that true? What is your opinion on that, Doctor?
You're talking about the American electorate?
I believe so.
Yeah. I mean, we have pretty low voting turnout for the world's oldest constitutional democracy. I mean, America likes to brag about, what a leading light we are in a, shining city on the hill for the rest of the world. And to be honest, right, our State Department tries to, export our democracy in some respect, right? We have lectures around the world about American federalism and other sorts of things. And America takes a great pride in its democracy. And I'm not saying we shouldn't, but on some measures, our democracy is not particularly healthy. And probably the top reason on that list is we have very low voter turnout compared to many other countries, including many other Western first world long-standing democracies. So even though there are some measures by which we look pretty strong, we've had peaceful transition of presidential power every 4 years from the time of George Washington, our first president, through Donald Trump. That's a pretty good measure, right? We've had civil unrest, we've had a civil war, we've had states secede from the Union. It's not a perfect path between 1788 and 2020. But, unless Trump refuses to leave the White House after losing and tries to call on the military to have a junta to take over an authoritarian regime without winning the election, I think we'll have a peaceful transfer of power if Biden wins this year as well. But on other measures, in terms of turnout and so forth, we have pretty low participation rates. Typically in a presidential election, we get about 55 to 60% of the age-eligible electorate turning out to vote in a presidential election. That's only every 4 years. When you look at midterm elections, that number is usually in the 30s, although we had a real amazing spike in turnout in 2018. The last midterm election is an even numbered year election when the presidency is not on the ballot. So 2018, 2014, 2010, when a third of the Senate, the upper chamber, all of the House, because it's 2-year terms, and then a variety of governors. Most of the governors, actually 39 of the 50 governors, are elected in the even year, what we call congressional year or midterm or off-year elections. Those terms are relatively used interchangeably. They made even-numbered years when the presidency is not on the ballot. We had a turnout in 2018 of 39.1% of the eligible electorate for the 2018 midterm election, which was the highest since 1914. It was the highest in more than a century. And 1914 was the first election when America, after the 17th Amendment, began to elect its senators instead of having their senators chosen by the state legislators and the state governments. And so that bodes well for perhaps a higher turnout. And I think we're going to have a record turnout for the modern period here next week. We had 139 million and change voters turn out, most for Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, but some 6% for the third party voters. Natural population growth, the country grows about 3% every 4 years. So 3% on top of that puts us at about 143 million, even if it was just sort of the same turnout rate as 4 years ago. But I think we're going to have a higher turnout rate. I think we'll have at least 150 million voters. Maybe I'm thinking it's going to be closer to 155 million. And that will be a high water turnout mark for the post-war period. But even then, it'll be at best 65% of the age eligible electorate. And the reason is a significant share of the population isn't even registered to vote. The vast majority of voters who are registered, about 85 to 90%, vote in presidential elections, but about 30 to 35% of voters aren't even registered in the first place. So we have a significant registration problem, and we don't have government-sponsored registration. We don't mandate that people register or vote, as some democracies do. And so, no president has ever won a majority of the votes of the eligible electorate, right? They won a majority of the votes cast, but every single one of our American presidents is a minoritarian president, because even if you get 60% of the vote and 60% of the people turn out, 6 times 6 is 0.36. Only about a third of adult Americans actually voted for you. So we've never had a majoritarian president. We would have to get 75% of the people to turn out, and 75% of those people vote for one candidate, because 0.7 times 0.7 is what, 0.49. So if you get 75% of the vote with 75% of the turnout, you'd have a majority of the adults voting for a candidate. But we're far, far from that. A, because we're polarized, nobody's going to get 75% of the vote, and B, because we're only getting 55 or 60% of the people to turn out in the first place.
All right, thank you. Hamdan?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, hi, Dr. Schaller. My name is Hamdan, and I would like to, first of all, thank you so much for taking part in this webinar. My main focus here is about Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Who do you think has a more promising contribution towards the recovery process of post-COVID-19?
Well, I think Biden is a little stronger on this issue, and voters agree, and polls think that he, by about a 10 or 15-point margin, will do a better job managing COVID. Now, I don't know that they think that because they think they have a good sense of what Biden would do. I think that's mostly a negative referendum on what Trump has done and not done since COVID. Trump's early statements downplaying the virus, saying we have 15 cases and we'll be down to zero cases soon. We're now at 8 million. I mean, that's a little bit off, right? 0 and 8 million are not two numbers that are very close to each other. Wishing openly that the country will be reopened by Easter, which is in the middle of April, and now it's the middle of October, right? Sort of denigrating governors who he doesn't agree with, and the way he's sort of managed the crisis. He just said this week, we're rounding the corner, even though we had more cases in the past 7 days than in any 7-day period since the start of the virus. So if we're rounding the corner, implying that we're on the backside of it, I mean, we're rounding the corner into even more outbreaks. And the outbreaks right now are worse for him in the red states. Like COVID has the highest death rate per capita in the world right now is the state of North Dakota, which is the third or fourth most Republican state in the union right now. And they have a governor there who's a big Trump supporter who has no mask requirements and thinks that masks don't help. And now they're learning the hard lesson of what happened. In fact, if you look at the top 18 states in the last month in terms of their COVID cases, they're all Republican red states that voted for Trump. So even in red America, even Republican America, people are starting to realize Trump didn't manage this as well. So asking myself, I mean, Biden did put an op-ed in the USA Today on January 27th saying, we are not ready for this virus. And here's all the things that need to be done. And nobody really paid attention to it because nobody really thought it was going to be a big deal on January 27th. But go back and read that USA Today op-ed. I'll try to find it and put it in the chat box here. I mean, Biden was warning what was going to happen. And much of what he predicted happened. Now, whether he'll be able to manage it, will he be able to get people to wear masks and properly socially distance? And will he get governors to limit the number of large events, community events and so forth? I don't know. Will he be able to get the money out of Congress to provide all the testing necessary and contact tracing? I mean, we don't have a contact tracing program in this country, right? We're the leader of the free world and we're the world's largest economy. And South Korea was able to put a contact tracing program within the first 2 weeks where every single South Korean went into a little plexiglass or plastic enclosed phone booth. They took a test. They gave their cell phone number, and if they were later tested positive, they were required to report back to the government of all the people they had an interface with, and they were able to track it. That's what you have to do. You have to track who has it, who they have interfaced with, and then limit it. That's how you quarantine and limit people and squash the virus. This is how we got rid of the polio, right? This is how we got rid of smallpox, right? We eliminate smallpox from the planet. Certainly we can eliminate COVID, but you have to have a contact tracing program, and the leader of the free world and the world's largest economy still doesn't have one. My wife and I only go out to restaurants that have patios, outdoor seating, which is safer than indoor seating. And even in the restaurants, only a few restaurants have asked for our phone numbers or taken our temperature with a little handheld thing. There's not even in the private sector temperature taking or contact tracing. And there certainly isn't happening at the government level, which can mandate these things. So, I mean, we're about to hit our third spike now, right? We had an initial spike in February, March, and then we had a big summer spike in June, July. And now our case rates and our hospitalization, our death rates are going up again. So is this our third wave or are we still in our first wave? You tell me. So I don't know. I think it's an open question whether Biden is better, but I don't think it's an open question at this point for many voters whether Trump is simply worse.
Okay, thank you. Hamad Al-Ka'bi.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. My question is about the Supreme Court's denial of the request made by Pennsylvania's Republican Party to limit mail-in voting. I mean, how bad will this affect Donald Trump?
Well, this is a very fascinating question, in part because we just had a new 9th justice added on Tuesday night, and about whether the Supreme Court will rule in Trump's favor. And so far, at least in some cases, no. But in some cases, with the late accepting ballots in Pennsylvania, by a 5-3 vote, it would seem to be yes. So one court ruling 4-4 with Chief Justice Roberts voting with the Democrats about North Carolina favored the Democrats, but the more recent ruling in Pennsylvania that says a ballot that is postmarked and submitted but isn't physically received on after election day can be excluded. It directly contravenes what was done in the Bush v. Gore case in 2000, where military ballots were accepted from overseas up to 10 days after the election and the original ballots were tabulated. So Brett Kavanaugh, who wrote this, very controversial footnote in that case this week, and who was a member of the Bush-Gore recount team. In fact, there are 9 Supreme Court justices, and 3 of them worked on the Bush recount team on the Bush side: Chief Justice Roberts, Brett Kavanaugh, and now Amy Coney Barrett. So a third of the Supreme Court worked on the Bush team during the 2000 recount. That is a fact. And it'll be interesting to see if there are court disputes, and those court disputes move to the federal level beyond the state court level, which party they will favor. Much like the Bush versus Gore ruling ultimately won the election essentially for Bush. The irony, and fascinating irony, is that the majority in that Bush v. Gore opinion in 2000 said that this ruling applies only to this election and shall not be essentially used as a precedent for future elections. But courts have used it constantly as a precedent, including Brett Kavanaugh, who cited that ruling in 2000, from 2000 in his concurrence this very week, 20 years later. So, the Supreme Court tried to say this is a ticket for, this ticket is only good for one ride in 2000. But that Supreme Court ruling sort of hovers over this election, and we could have a disputed election much like we had in 2000. I just put the link to the Joe Biden USA Today op-ed from January 27th up there.
Thank you. Hussein, if you could please turn your mic on.
Hello, Dr. Schaller. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
So I have a kind of sketchy question, but I want to ask it like from a long time ago. So it's about the votes the voting system and how this question will affect on Trump's voting. So the director of national intelligence dropped a bombshell and exposed Hillary Clinton that she organized the campaign to stir up a scandal by linking President Trump to Russia in 2016, and President Barack Obama knew about her possible role. So how will it affect President Trump's voting this year?
Well, I mean, Trump is trying to sort of rerun the 2016 campaign. He's still mentioning Hillary Clinton, and I think their campaign is trying to sort of, with the Hunter Biden story, sort of revive this, crooked Hillary, crooked Joe Biden theme. But I don't think anything that came out of the Mueller report or the investigation of the Russian campaign to help elect Trump, which is not disputed in the Mueller report. There's no question that the GRU and the IRA, the 2 Russian intelligence arms, did engage in a hack and dump campaign, and they did engage in a social media influence campaign. And the Senate Select Committee, which is a majority Republican committee in the Senate, agreed the same. Whether or not the Trump campaign was colluding with the Russians and knew about this in real time is still in dispute. So I don't know that anything really from the Russia controversy and Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump is factoring that much. I think the state of the economy and COVID and more recent events are far more prevalent in the voters' calculus. I mean, maybe for some voters, it's still this lingering thing for them from 4 years ago, but probably only voters who are strongly Trump or strongly Clinton voters, Clinton-Biden voters already. Maybe most swing voters are probably not deciding on 4-year-old controversies, is my sense of it.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat from Badr, and he is asking, do you support 2 terms of presidency?
Ford?
Do you support 2 terms of presidency?
Oh, the limit?
Yeah.
I guess I do. I don't think it's going to change anyway. It's kind of a moot point when the country passed the 22nd Amendment after FDR had been elected to 4 terms. Amendments are very hard to pass and reverse. So whether I like it or not is sort of a moot point. I think we're going to have a 2-term limit for a long time. But in general, I guess I think it's pretty good, although it does deprive people of a 3rd term for a president. Bill Clinton might have won in 2000 re-election. Obama might have won in 2016 running against Donald Trump. We'll never know that, of course. So we'll see. I don't know. It's not going to change, though.
Okay, thank you. Hiya, Shamsi.
Hello, doctor. Hello?
Yes.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you for asking. Doctor, I wanted to ask, did Kanye saying he wanted to run for president influence anything in the electoral system?
No, not one bit. He's completely irrelevant.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Hamail, please turn your mic on.
Good evening. So I had a question. So President Trump has made it abundantly clear that in the face of defeat, he would be questioning the legitimacy of these elections, particularly when it comes to mail-in votes, which he has claimed are prone to widespread fraud. He has also fomented that he would decline to commit to a peaceful transfer of power. So if President Trump loses the upcoming election, would he really rally a movement around him after the elections to take it to the Supreme Court? And would he achieve Republican backing in this move?
Well, he certainly may dispute a closely contested state like Pennsylvania or Florida in the courts if he thinks he can win or what have you. So that's part one of the question. And then in terms of him leaving office, I mean, there's a lot of sort of Democrats and liberals nervous that like Trump will barricade himself in the White House. But, you know, once the electoral votes are certified and Joe Biden is declared the winner, he'll have the power of the presidency. He could literally order the military to take Trump out of the White House. So I don't think Donald Trump is going to be inside the White House bunker. There is a several level deep bunker underneath the White House that includes a situation room, and it's all bomb proof and attack proof, which is why I don't know why Trump built this giant wall. There's a giant white fence around the White House right now. I don't know if you know that since the Black Lives Matter protests. I live about 2 miles from the White House. We've never seen anything like that before, but you know, Trump will be easily removed from the White House physically if that's what it comes to, but I don't think it'll come to that. In fact, I'll make a prediction right now. Ready? I don't think Joe Biden's going to be the 46th president of the United States. I think if he wins, he's going to end up being the 47th vice president because I think Trump will resign rather than show up at the inauguration on January 20th, perhaps to give Pence a chance to pardon him. Trump's alluded to the possibility that he will pardon himself for any potential future, you know, financial or other, you know, improprieties. And Trump has himself said he probably wouldn't show up for the inauguration, which I think does serious damage to our democratic norms because the peaceful transfer of power includes the losing party or the losing candidate showing up for the swearing in of his successor. And every president has written a personal letter to the next president and left it in the president's drawer to read, even when those two candidates fought vigorously and aggressively against each other. So there's a reasonable possibility, in my view, that Trump won't be president on January 19th if he's not elected on November 3rd, reelected. So we'll see.
All right, thank you. So we are running out of time. So we're going to go for our last question by Saleh. If you would please turn your mic on.
Hi, Professor. Hi, Professor. I just want to ask, how does a person decide that they want to run for election?
I don't know how any individual person decides to run for re-election. We know what kinds of people decide to run for re-election. We know that men are more likely to run and white people are more likely to run on average. That's changing, though. We're seeing more and more women candidates and more women elected. We have more than 20% of the women in Congress are now women in both the Senate and the House. About 80% of that 20% are Democrats. The Democrats elect far more women. On the state legislative level, it's even higher in some states. Some states now have 40% women in the state legislatures. Maryland is one of the higher states. I think where I teach is in the upper 30%. On average, it's about 24, 25, 26% of the state legislators in the 50 states, House and Senate in our federal system. So we're seeing more and more people of color and more women run. We're also seeing more people from what's considered the non-traditional backgrounds, people not from business and politics, people from entertainment, people from education and other fields who are running instead of the traditional, legislature full of, white male lawyers and businessmen. When you look at the demographic backgrounds of the Congress across time, it has changed rapidly in the last 50 years and certainly in the last 20 years. So how an individual person decides, most people who run for office, we do have amateurs who run, who've never really run for anything before, been involved in politics. People usually get involved in politics in the local level, and maybe they run for, a local office on the city or county level. And then, they sort of have what's called progressive ambition that has nothing to do with left, right. They try to proceed up the ladder and run for state legislature, or they run for Congress. you can see former presidents as good examples. Barack Obama was a state legislator in Illinois, and then he was the US Senator from Illinois, and then he was president, right? And John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon were members of the House, and then they were members of the US Senate, and then they were president, you know? So a lot of politicians running for office were politicians already running for a previous office. But the individual calculus, I mean, who knows exactly what goes into the mind of any given person in terms of why they decide to run, but it's still only a very, very small fraction of people who ever run for office, of course.
Okay, thank you. I think we can go for one more question from the
Sure,
chat.
I'll stay as long as people want.
Okay.
Your time is my time is your time.
Sharifa is asking if Biden wins the elections, is he going to shift the US from protectionism to a liberal economy? And how is he going to deal with the rise of China?
I'm not a good international diplomacy, foreign policy person. I do more domestic politics, so I'll punt on the first question. I mean, I think what's interesting about the second question, excuse me, but I think what's interesting about the first question is that Trump really broke with Republican and even especially conservative orthodoxy on 3 issues when he ran in 2016. And he's not the first person to do this on any of those issues, but in a way, he's the first presidential candidate to break with the party on 3 issues. One is isolationism and the US's multilateralism, you know, leader of the West, Atlantic alliance sort of approach to foreign policy. 2, of course, is trade, with a more protectionist, you know, trade war approach, whereas the Republican Party has long been a free trade, global market party. And then the 3rd, of course, is immigration, which hasn't come up at all, to sort of build the wall, Mexico pay for it, and all this other stuff. So on this, on the second of those 2, I mean, Trump has rattled his sabers a lot about protectionism in China. Here, China's a little bit in terms of on the market side. I don't know if you mean the rise of China politically and militarily. I'm so not sure about the second part of your question, but renegotiating NAFTA with the USMCA, the US-Mexico-Canada agreement. If you look at that, 90% of NAFTA is in USMCA. I mean, Trump tinkered with it a little bit at the margins and maybe got some wins for the United States in terms of trade policy with our North American neighbors. But if you look at it line by line, the policy is 85 to 90% the same. So Trump said NAFTA is the worst trade agreement we ever did, and he replicated 85, 90% of it, which he of course won't tell you, but that's true, right? Our trade agreement with our largest trade partner, Canada, and our second largest trade partner, Mexico, really hasn't changed that much. And then in some of the trade deals, things have gotten worse. I mean, the bankruptcy rates and the suicide rates among Wisconsin dairy farmers are through the roof. And of course, Trump has spent more to bail out US farmers than Obama spent to bail out the US auto industry, for which conservatives criticized Obama for bailing out the auto industry, and Trump's bailout of the farming industry in the United States to compensate for the backlash and the unintended, unless you're paying attention, the intended consequences of these trade deals have really hurt domestic production, because when you start a trade war, the other side doesn't say, okay, you want to pick a trade war with us, we surrender. No, they engage in a trade war right back at you and start denying your exports. And so US exports, particularly in dairy and soy and corn, have devastated, and the share of crop bankruptcies and farm bankruptcies since Trump took office have soared through the roof. You're not going to hear him tell you that, but look it up. It's true. And so US taxpayers have spent upwards of $50 billion now subsidizing farmers, more than we already were. There was plenty of subsidization of farmers before Trump came in office because of these trade wars. So I don't know how much that will change. But it's sort of ironic that the Democrats and Biden are the more free trade party all of a sudden, and the Republicans are the more protectionist party, because the Democrats are more closely wedded to the unions. And for a long time, we're obviously the more protectionist, keep American jobs at home. I think a shorthand for all of this is, Trump said repeatedly in 2016, we're getting killed by China. China is killing us. But his daughter, Ivanka, has 40 patents and is making shoes and clothing in China right now with Chinese materials and Chinese labor. And of course, the MAGA hats are made in China. Those red hats that you see, go look online, the labels are made in China. They're not made by America workers, America first, America jobs. They're made with foreign materials by foreign workers in China.
All right, thank you. This concludes our Q&A session for the webinar. Thank you all for your participation, and I apologize for not allowing you all to participate, but we're running out of time. Thank you, Dr. Schaller, for the information. I am now going to pass it on to Riman.
Thank you, Hadil. So thank you so much, Professor Dr. Schaller, for the speech and the seminar. It was really intriguing and it was so interesting. But before everyone leaves, I just want to make sure that if you look at the chat right now, I'm going to send it. Wait, here's the chat. You're going to find a link to a Google form so you can fill out your information and receive a personalized certificate of attendance. So to conclude, I'd like to thank all of our guests for their questions, for their curiosity, and your presence. Like the participation made this event truly enjoyable, and I loved every second of it. So thank you, Dr. Schaller. I would like to extend a thanks on behalf of the entire department and for all of the effort that you placed in today for sharing your knowledge with us. So thank you all and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Riemann.
You're welcome, Professor.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Shima. Thank you, Hadil. Thank you, Hala. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Well done. That was really good.